What happens when a person who has nothing meets a man who has everything but values nothing? In the heart of the city, at an opulent restaurant where whispers are more valuable than gold, every server lives in fear of one man, the billionaire tyrant, Alex Blackwood. They call him a monster, a man whose heart is carved from ice. For years, everyone has learned the art of avoidance, of becoming invisible in his presence. But what happens when the newest, most desperate waitress, a young woman with nothing to lose, decides she won't be invisible? This isn't just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It's a story about how one act of courage can shatter a fortress of grief and prove that the deepest wounds can be healed by the most unexpected kindness. The air in the back of house of the Gilded Quill was a thick stew of steam, stress, and the clatter of frantic activity. For Cassie Mae Thompson, it was the most terrifying and exhilarating place on earth. At 23, with shoulders burdened by student loan debt from an art degree she was determined to finish, this job wasn't a choice, it was a lifeline. The Gilded Quill was the pinnacle of New York fine dining, a place where a single night's tips could pay her rent for a month. Landing a position here was like being drafted to the major leagues. Her first week was a blur of memorizing the pedigrees of obscure French cheeses, mastering the silent ballet of synchronized service, and learning the intricate social map of the restaurant's clientele. It was on her third day that she first heard the name, spoken in the same hushed, fearful tone one might use for a plague or a coming storm: Blackwood. It was Gavin, a senior waiter with tired eyes and the weary posture of a man who had seen it all, who pulled her aside. "Listen, kid," he began, polishing a wine glass until it squeaked in protest. "You're doing all right. You're quick. You're not clumsy. But I need to give you the most important rule of this restaurant, one that Mr. Dubois won't put in the employee handbook." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Table 12, at 8 o'clock every Tuesday and Friday. That's his table. Alex Blackwood." Cassie had heard the name, of course. Alex Blackwood was a titan of the tech industry, a recluse whose company, Blackwood Innovations, was reshaping the world with ruthless efficiency. His face, sharp and severe, occasionally graced the covers of business magazines, always with an expression that looked like he'd just tasted something sour. "Okay," Cassie said, trying to sound unfazed. "Big spender?" Gavin let out a short, bitter laugh. "Oh, he spends. But that's not the problem. The man is poison. He will find a flaw in everything. The water is too cold. The air is too still. The silence is too loud. He speaks to you like you're something he scraped off his shoe. He's had 3 waiters quit mid-shift. One of them, a guy named Robert, a 20-year veteran, apparently started crying right there at the table. Blackwood just watched him, took a sip of his water, and asked for the check." Cassie felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "So, what's the protocol?" "The protocol is survival," Gavin said, his eyes dark with memory. "We draw straws. The loser gets the table. Most of us have found ways to be conveniently busy, in the wine cellar, dealing with a kitchen emergency. Mr. Dubois has to practically force someone to take it. My advice? If you get picked, just nod. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact. Be a ghost. Get in, get out, and pray." That evening, the tension in the staff room was palpable. It was Tuesday. Mr. Dubois, the restaurant's impeccably dressed and perpetually stressed manager, entered holding a small velvet bag. Inside were numbered chips. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his French accent making the pronouncement sound far more elegant than it was. "Mr. Blackwood's reservation is confirmed for 8. A collective groan, quickly suppressed, rippled through the room. Cassie watched as seasoned waiters, who could gracefully handle the demands of ambassadors and celebrities, suddenly looked like prisoners awaiting a sentence. Gavin paled. A waitress named Sophia crossed herself. Mr. Dubois plunged his hand into the bag. "Number 7. A wave of relieved sighs washed over the room. Cassie looked down at the small brass chip she'd been given. A polished, gleaming number 7. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was her. Gavin gave her a look of profound pity. "Deep breaths, kid. Remember what I said. Be a ghost." At precisely 8:40 p.m., the heavy oak doors of the Gilded Quill swung open. A chill seemed to precede the man who entered. Alex Blackwood was taller than his photos suggested, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than Cassie's entire tuition. He moved with a predatory stillness, his gaze sweeping across the room with an air of utter disdain, as if the entire opulent scene was an inconvenience. The low murmur of conversation in the dining room seemed to dip by several decibels. Mr. Dubois greeted him with a practiced, deferential smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure. Your table is ready." Blackwood didn't respond. He simply walked towards the secluded corner booth, table 12, which offered a commanding view of the restaurant while remaining shrouded in relative privacy. He sat, placing his hands on the table, and the wait began. The staff knew he would not even look at a menu for at least 10 minutes, a silent power play to establish that his time was the only time that mattered. Cassie stood by the service station, her hands trembling slightly. She smoothed down her crisp black apron, took a slow, deep breath, and picked up the water carafe. A ghost, Gavin had said. But as she watched the solitary, forbidding figure at table 12, a different thought, a spark of defiance she hadn't known was in her, flickered to life. She was an artist. Her life's passion was to observe, to see the truth beneath the surface. And looking at Alex Blackwood, she didn't just see a monster. She saw the loneliest man she had ever laid eyes on. With her chin held a little higher than necessary, she started the long walk toward table 12, the sound of her own footsteps unnaturally loud in the sudden, expectant silence. The legend was about to meet the new waitress, and Cassie had a feeling that being a ghost was simply not in her nature. As Cassie approached table 12, it felt as though she were walking through water. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the gentle clink of silverware, the murmur of discreet conversations, seemed to fade into a dull roar in her ears. Her focus narrowed to the man sitting in the booth. Alex Blackwood hadn't moved a muscle. He was staring out the large window beside him, his profile sharp and unforgiving against the glittering backdrop of the city lights. She reached the table and stood for a moment, waiting to be acknowledged. The silence stretched, becoming heavy and uncomfortable. He knew she was there. It was part of the game. She could feel the eyes of her colleagues, of Mr. Dubois, burning into her back from across the room. They were waiting for the first crack, the first sign of her breaking. Taking another steadying breath, Cassie broke the silence herself. Her voice, though quiet, was clear and steady. "Good evening, sir. May I pour you some water?" Alex Blackwood's head turned slowly, and for the first time, his eyes met hers. They were a startlingly pale gray, cold and clear as a winter sky, and utterly devoid of warmth. They weren't angry or annoyed. They were something far worse, dismissive. They looked through her as if she were a pane of glass. He didn't answer. He simply gestured with a flick of his wrist toward the empty glass, a command without words. Cassie poured the chilled water, her hand miraculously steady. She placed the carafe on the table, ensuring the restaurant's crest faced him perfectly, just as she'd been taught. "Our specials this evening are," she began, preparing to recite the chef's creations. "I know what I want." He cut her off, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. "I have the same thing every time." Gavin had warned her about this. The order never changed. It was a test of the staff's memory, a way to trip up anyone new. "Of course, sir," Cassie replied, her tone even. The seared scallops with saffron risotto to start, followed by the dry-aged ribeye, cooked medium rare, with a side of asparagus, no hollandaise, and a bottle of the 2012 Chateau Margaux. For the first time since she had approached the table, a flicker of something registered in those icy eyes. It wasn't surprise, not quite. It was more like the faint annoyance of a complex machine discovering a tiny, unexpected gear working perfectly. He had expected her to ask, to falter, to need his guidance. She had given him none of that. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "See that you don't have the kitchen ruin it." It wasn't a request, it was a threat. Cassie simply replied, "I will convey your instructions to the chef personally, sir." She turned and walked away, her back straight, her stride measured. She could feel his gaze on her until she passed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The moment she was out of sight, she leaned against a stainless steel counter, her legs feeling like jelly. The chef, a burly, temperamental man named Antoine, looked up from his station. "Table 12? Cassie nodded, handing him the order slip she'd filled out from memory. Antoine grunted. "The tyrant's supper. Make sure you check the steak temperature twice. Last time he sent it back because he claimed it was 1 degree over. 1 degree." The meal proceeded with the tense precision of a bomb disposal. Cassie ensured the wine was decanted perfectly. She served the scallops with silent grace. He ate without comment, his expression unchanging. When she cleared the plate, he spoke again, without looking at her. The risotto was under-seasoned, barely perceptible, but a flaw nonetheless. Cassie paused. Her training and Gavin's advice screamed at her to just nod and apologize. Be a ghost, don't engage. But the artist in her, the person who understood nuance and balance, couldn't let it go. She had tasted the dish herself during the pre-service briefing. It was perfect. My apologies, sir, she said, her voice still respectful but firm. Chef Antoine believes the delicate flavor of the saffron is easily overpowered. He seasons it to complement the sweetness of the scallop, not to dominate it. He finally looked up at her again, his fork halfway to his mouth. This time the look wasn't dismissive, it was sharp, analytical. He was dissecting her, trying to understand what he was seeing. A waitress wasn't supposed to have an opinion on the chef's philosophy. A waitress was supposed to agree and grovel. Is that so? He said, his voice laced with a dangerous sort of curiosity. Yes, sir, Cassie said simply, holding his gaze for a fraction of a second before her training kicked in and she lowered her eyes. I will bring your main course shortly. She retreated once more, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. She had just broken the cardinal rule. She had engaged. She had, in her own small way, corrected him. She fully expected Mr. Dubois to intercept her, to hiss at her for her recklessness. But he was busy with another table, and she made it to the kitchen unscathed. When she served the ribeye, she placed it before him and announced, the dry-aged ribeye, cooked medium rare, as requested. He sliced into the steak, a precise surgical cut. He examined the cross-section, the perfect ruby-red center fading to a seared crust. He took a bite, chewing slowly, deliberately. The silence was agonizing. Cassie remained at the table, a silent statue awaiting the verdict. He swallowed, took a sip of wine, and then dabbed his lips with his napkin. He still didn't look at her. Acceptable, was all he said. In the world of Alex Blackwood, acceptable was the highest possible praise. As Cassie walked away, a strange sense of victory settled over her. She hadn't been a ghost. She hadn't been invisible. She had been a professional, and she had met the monster on his own turf without flinching. For the rest of the meal, he was silent. He finished his steak, declined dessert, and finished his wine. When he was ready for the check, he didn't snap his fingers or call out. He simply caught her eye from across the room and gave a single commanding nod. She brought the leather billfold to the table. He placed a black credit card inside without looking at the total. She took it, processed the payment, and returned with the slip for him to sign. He scrawled a signature that was as sharp and illegible as his personality. As he rose to leave, he paused. Cassie stood a respectful distance away, ready to pull out the chair for him. He turned his head slightly. What is your name? He asked. The question was so unexpected, it almost made her gasp. Cassie, sir. Cassie Thompson. He held her gaze for a beat longer, that same analytical glint in his eyes. Then, without another word, he turned and strode out of the restaurant, leaving a wake of relieved silence behind him. Cassie went to clear the table, her mind racing. Tucked into the billfold underneath the signed receipt was the tip. The Gilded Quill's staff pooled their tips, but it was customary to see what a table had left. She braced herself for a deliberately insulting amount, a single dollar, or perhaps nothing at all. She lifted the receipt. The bill was over $1,000. The tip he had added was exactly $500. It was a perfectly respectable, if not overly generous, amount. But it was what he'd written on the tip line that made her breath catch in her throat. Next to the dollar amount, in that same sharp script, were two words, for the commentary. The story of Cassie's first night serving Alex Blackwood spread through the staff like wildfire. For the commentary became a legendary phrase whispered in the kitchen and by the service stations. Gavin looked at her with a newfound respect, shaking his head in disbelief. Kid, I don't know if you're brave or crazy. Mr. Dubois watched her with a wary eye, unsure if she was an asset or a liability he'd soon have to fire. Cassie herself wasn't sure. All she knew was that on Friday, there was no drawing of straws. Mr. Dubois approached her directly. Miss Thompson, table 12 will be yours from now on. It sounded less like a promotion and more like a sentence. The following weeks fell into a strange, tense rhythm. Every Tuesday and Friday, Alex Blackwood would arrive at 8. Cassie would serve him. The dynamic remained the same. He was demanding, cold, and hypercritical. He would find minuscule faults, a fingerprint on a glass invisible to the naked eye, a slight wobble in the table that no one else could detect. But something had shifted. He no longer treated her like she was invisible. When he made his critiques, he would look at her, waiting for her response. And Cassie, growing more confident, would respond not with apologies but with solutions and explanations. "This wine is warmer than the last bottle," he stated one night after taking a single sip. "My apologies, sir. It came from a different rack in the cellar. I will have it chilled to your preferred temperature immediately," she replied, already moving to correct the issue. "The noise from the table across the room is distracting," he complained on another occasion. "I understand, sir. They are celebrating an anniversary. I have already anticipated this and can move you to table 14, which is equally private but further from the disturbance, if you wish." He never took her up on the offer, but he would simply nod, a grudging acknowledgement of her foresight. It became a bizarre chess match. He was testing her, pushing her, and she was meeting every move with unshakable competence. She learned to anticipate his needs before he was aware of them himself. The water was always at the perfect temperature. A fresh napkin appeared before he knew he needed one. She even began to notice subtle patterns. He ate less when the stock market had a volatile day. He drank his wine faster on rainy evenings. She was no longer just his waitress. She was his observer. The artist in her was fascinated by this man who had built a fortress around himself so high that no one could get in, but from which he could find fault in the entire world outside. The crack in that fortress appeared on a Tuesday in late November. The restaurant was busier than usual, filled with the early buzz of the holiday season. Cassie was moving quickly, balancing a tray laden with entrees for a party of 6. As she navigated a narrow path between tables, a guest at another table suddenly pushed his chair back, without looking, directly into her path. Time seemed to slow down. Cassie twisted her body trying to avoid a collision, but it was no use. The tray tilted precariously. She managed to save the plates, but a full, deep red glass of Cabernet tipped over the edge, arcing through the air in a perfect, horrifying trajectory. It landed directly on the sleeve of Alex Blackwood's immaculate white shirt. A collective gasp went through the section. The dark red wine bloomed across the crisp cotton like a grotesque flower. The entire dining room fell silent. Mr. Dubois froze, his face a mask of pure terror. Gavin, standing by the bar, closed his eyes as if he couldn't bear to watch the execution. Cassie's blood ran cold. This was it. This was the unpardonable sin. This was how her lifeline got severed. Alex Blackwood looked down at his ruined sleeve, then slowly lifted his gaze to her. The glacial coldness in his eyes had intensified into a white-hot fury. The air crackled with it. "You," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, "are incompetent." Cassie stood frozen, her mind a blank slate of panic. Her training, her composure, everything vanished. All she could think was, "It's over." Mr. Dubois began rushing over, wringing his hands, apologies already spilling from his lips. "Mr. Blackwood, 1,000 apologies. A terrible accident. Miss Thompson, you are dismissed. Go to my office at once." But as Cassie opened her mouth to stammer out an apology, she saw something. As his hand lay on the table, stained with a few drops of wine, she noticed his other hand instinctively went to his chest, his fingers briefly touching a thin silver chain that always hung around his neck, usually hidden by his tie. For a split second, the fury in his eyes was eclipsed by another emotion, something raw and agonizing that looked like pure, undiluted pain. It was there and gone in a flash, but she saw it. That glimpse of vulnerability short-circuited her fear. It was replaced by an overwhelming, inexplicable wave of empathy. Ignoring Mr. Dubois, she stepped forward. She took a clean napkin from her apron, uncapped a bottle of sparkling water from his table, and poured a small amount onto the cloth. "Sir, if you allow me," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "Club soda can prevent the stain from setting." "Please." She held out the damp napkin. Blackwood stared at her, his jaw tight. The entire restaurant watched, breathless. He was a man who commanded boardrooms and brought competitors to their knees. He was not a man who allowed a waitress to tend to him like a clumsy child. He looked from her face to the napkin, then back again. The internal war in his eyes was visible. His fury was warring with something else. Confusion? Intrigue? After a silence that felt like an eternity, he slowly, stiffly extended his arm. Cassie gently took his wrist. Her touch was professional, her movements swift and efficient as she dabbed at the crimson stain. The room was so quiet you could hear the fizz of the club soda on the cotton. She worked for a minute, her focus entirely on the task, blocking out the stunned faces of her colleagues in the other diners. When she was done, the stain was much lighter, though not gone. "I've done what I can for now, sir," she said softly, releasing his arm. "But the shirt will need professional cleaning. Of course, the restaurant will cover the cost of a replacement." She finally looked up and met his eyes, bracing for the inevitable dismissal. "I am deeply sorry. It was my fault." Alex Blackwood said nothing. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Mr. Dubois was hovering, looking as if he might faint. The check, sir?" the manager stammered. Blackwood pulled his gaze away from Cassie and leveled it at Dubois. "I haven't finished my meal," he stated coldly. "Bring me another steak. And bring her," he nodded towards Cassie, "another bottle of the Margot. It would seem this one has been spilled." Then he turned his attention back to his plate as if nothing had happened, leaving the entire restaurant, and especially Cassie, in a state of profound shock. He had every reason to fire her, to ruin the restaurant's reputation, to unleash the legendary wrath everyone feared. Instead, he had ordered another steak. He had defended her in his own impossibly arrogant way against her own manager. As Cassie numbly walked back to the kitchen to place the order, she knew something fundamental had broken that night. It wasn't just the wine glass. It was a crack in the impenetrable armor of Alex Blackwood. And for the first time, she felt a desperate need to understand what, or who, he was protecting underneath it all. The wine incident marked a definitive turning point. Alex Blackwood's demeanor towards Cassie didn't soften into friendliness. He was still demanding and taciturn, but the aggressive testing ceased. An unspoken understanding now existed between them. He came to expect her unflappable competence, and she came to understand the subtle nuances of his moods. But the question of why he was the way he was became an obsession for her. The flash of raw pain she'd seen in his eyes haunted her. It was a clue, a loose thread, and the artist in her, the part that sought to understand the human condition, couldn't resist pulling it. Her evenings after her exhausting shifts and before her pre-dawn art classes were now spent in the dim glow of her laptop screen. She started with the obvious: business articles, profiles in Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal. They all painted the same picture: a ruthless prodigy who took over his father's tech firm at 25 and transformed it into a global empire. The articles spoke of his uncompromising vision, his relentless drive, and his singular focus. They mentioned his reclusive nature, but always framed it as the eccentricity of a genius, not as a symptom of something deeper. It was boring. It was the corporate armor, polished for public consumption. This wasn't the man, it was the brand. Cassie knew she had to dig deeper before the brand was all there was. She changed her search terms, going back further in time. She added words like gala, society, charity ball. She sifted through years of society pages and photo archives. And there, buried in the digital dust of a decade-old article from a glossy lifestyle magazine, she found him. The Alex Blackwood in the photograph was almost unrecognizable. He was younger, yes, but the change was more profound than that. He was smiling. It wasn't a guarded, polite smile. It was a wide, genuine, unguarded beam of pure happiness. His arm was wrapped around a woman who was laughing, her head thrown back in joy. She was beautiful, with vibrant red hair that fell in soft waves around her shoulders and eyes that sparkled even in the grainy photo. Her name was Eleanor Blackwood, his wife. Cassie's heart started to beat faster. She had never known he was married. No recent article ever mentioned a spouse. She clicked on the photo, and the caption gave her the context: Alex and Eleanor Blackwood at the annual Children's Hospital Foundation Gala. The article was a fawning piece about the city's most beloved power couple, praising their generosity and their obvious devotion to one another. It quoted an attendee: "To see them together is to see what true love looks like. He absolutely adores her." Cassie kept digging, using Eleanor's name now. She found dozens of similar articles from a period of about 5 years. Eleanor and Alex at museum openings. Eleanor and Alex at charity auctions. Eleanor, an architect by trade, launching her own foundation to build sustainable community centers in low-income neighborhoods. In every photo, he looked at her with an expression of such profound adoration that it made Cassie's breath catch. This wasn't a man with a heart of ice. This was a man whose heart had been entirely given over to one person. Then the article stopped. Abruptly, Cassie changed her search terms again, a sense of dread creeping over her. Alex Blackwood, Eleanor Blackwood, accident. The results hit her like a physical blow. 5 years ago, a single headline from the Associated Press told the whole story. Eleanor Blackwood, philanthropist and wife of tech billionaire, killed in tragic car accident. She read the article, her stomach twisting into a tight, painful knot. It was a rainy Friday night. They were on their way home from dinner. A drunk driver ran a red light, T-boning their car on the passenger side. Eleanor was killed instantly. Alex walked away with only minor injuries. The pieces slammed into place with dizzying, sickening clarity. 5 years ago. That's when the gushing profiles stopped and the articles about the ruthless recluse began. He didn't just retreat from public life. He retreated from life itself. Cassie leaned back in her chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the tears welling in her eyes. The gilded quill. It must have been their place. The Tuesday and Friday reservations. Were they anniversaries? Rituals? A desperate attempt to hold on to a routine they once shared? And then the final heart-shattering piece fell into place. His order, the one that never changed. The seared scallops with saffron risotto and the dry-aged ribeye. She scrolled furiously through the old articles until she found a lifestyle piece, a short interview with Eleanor about her work. The final question was a fluffy one. What's your ideal date night? Eleanor's answer was right there in print. Oh, that's easy. My husband takes me to the Gilded Quill. I don't even have to look at the menu. I get my favorite, the scallops and the ribeye. It's simple, perfect, and it's our time. He wasn't ordering his favorite meal. He was ordering hers. Every Tuesday, every Friday, for 5 years. He was coming to the restaurant they loved, sitting at what must have been their table, and ordering the meal his wife would have ordered. He wasn't being difficult for the sake of it. He was a man trapped in the worst moment of his life, replaying it over and over, trying to keep her memory alive in the only way he knew how. His rudeness, his impossible standards, his cold fury. It wasn't malice. It was a shield, a way to keep everyone at a distance so no one could see that beneath the billionaire tyrant was a man shattered by grief, drowning in it, alone in a corner booth for two. The silver chain he always wore. Cassie frantically searched for a clearer picture of him and Eleanor. She found one, a close-up from a gala. There it was. Around Eleanor's neck was the same thin silver chain, holding what looked like a small, simple silver locket. He was wearing his dead wife's locket. Cassie shut her laptop, the silence of her small apartment suddenly deafening. The monster of Table 12 was gone. In his place was a profoundly broken man, performing a heartbreaking ritual of remembrance twice a week. And for 5 years, everyone around him had only seen the anger, not the agony that fueled it. She knew she couldn't continue the same chess match with him anymore. The game had changed because she now understood the rules. The next time he came in, she couldn't just be his competent, unflappable waitress. She had to do something. It was a terrifying, reckless thought, but it was one she couldn't shake. She had to find a way to break the ritual. The following Tuesday, Cassie felt a nervous energy she hadn't experienced since her very first day. Knowing Alex Blackwood's secret had changed everything. She no longer saw him as a challenge to be managed, but as a puzzle to be solved, a wound to be mended. She felt a profound and terrifying sense of responsibility. Her plan was simple, audacious, and could very easily get her fired. She arrived for her shift early and went straight to the kitchen. Chef Antoine was sharpening his knives with rhythmic, aggressive strokes. "Chef," Cassie began, her voice more confident than she felt, "I have a special request for Table 12 tonight." Antoine grunted without looking up. "Let me guess. The tyrant wants his scallops woven from solid gold and his steak aged in the tears of his enemies." "Something like that," Cassie said with a small smile. "I need you to prepare his usual order, the scallops and the ribeye. But I also need you to make something else. Something off menu." Now he stopped, looking at her with suspicion. We don't do off-menu for him. The man is a creature of habit. Deviating from the script is professional suicide. Please, just hear me out, she pleaded. She took a deep breath. I need you to make a simple, classic apple crumble, the kind with an oat and brown sugar topping, and serve it with a scoop of cinnamon ice cream, the best you can possibly make. Antoine stared at her, baffled. Apple crumble? This is the Gilded Quill, not a countryside bake sale. And he never orders dessert, ever. I know, but I have a feeling. Please, chef, trust me on this. There was a sincerity and a strange urgency in her voice that made the formidable chef pause. He had witnessed her stand up to Blackwood, had seen the strange rapport they'd developed. He was intrigued. This is your funeral, Thompson, he said at last, a glimmer of curiosity in his eye. But it will be the best damn apple crumble he's ever seen. Now get out of my kitchen. At 8 o'clock, Alex Blackwood arrived like clockwork. He looked the same as always, impeccably dressed, his face a mask of stern indifference. Cassie greeted him, her heart thudding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Good evening, Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice calm. Your usual table is ready. He gave his customary curt nod and settled into the booth. She poured his water and took the wine order. The first part of the service proceeded exactly as it always did. He ordered Eleanor's meal without looking at the menu, and Cassie put in the ticket. She served the scallops. He ate them in silence. She cleared the plate. The main course was next. This was the moment of truth. Back in the kitchen, 2 plates sat under the heat lamp. One held the perfectly cooked dry-aged ribeye. The other held the warm, fragrant apple crumble, the cinnamon ice cream just beginning to melt into its golden topping. Cassie took a deep, shaky breath. She picked up the plate with the dessert. What are you doing? Gavin hissed from across the pass, his eyes wide with alarm. That's not his main course. Just trust me, she whispered back. Her walk to table 12 felt a mile long. She was breaking every rule. She was defying a direct order from a man who could end her career with a single word. She was interrupting his sacred 5-year-long ritual. She reached the table. Alex Blackwood was looking out the window, expecting his steak. Mr. Blackwood, she said softly. He turned his head, his eyes already narrowed, ready to find fault. But then he saw the plate she was holding. His face for the first time registered genuine, unadulterated confusion. He looked from the dessert to her face, his brow furrowed. I did not order this, he said, his voice flat and dangerous. This is not my meal. I know, sir, Cassie replied, her voice trembling slightly but her gaze steady. She placed the apple crumble on the table in front of him. I know this isn't what you ordered. Then I suggest you take it back and bring me what I did order, he said, the ice returning to his voice. Now, this was the precipice. She could retreat, apologize, and things would go back to the way they were. Or she could jump. She chose to jump. I read an old interview with you once, she said, speaking quickly before she lost her nerve. From a long time ago. A university newspaper, I think. They asked you what your favorite food was. Not your favorite fine dining dish, just your favorite food in the world. And you said it was the apple crumble your mother used to make when you were a boy. The effect of her words was immediate and seismic. The anger in his eyes vanished, replaced by a look of profound, stunned shock. His carefully constructed mask didn't just crack, it shattered. He looked utterly unguarded, exposed. He stared at the dessert as if it were a ghost. I know you come here for the scallops and the ribeye, Cassie continued, her voice gentle now. And I know that's important. But I just thought, maybe for one night, you might want to eat something that was just for you. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just stared at the plate. The aroma of baked apples and cinnamon, a scent of warmth and home and a lifelong past, filled the space between them. He slowly lowered his gaze from her face to the dessert. His hand, resting on the table, was visibly trembling. Cassie knew she had said all she could. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the ghost of his childhood and the first deviation from his ritual in 5 years. She went to a discreet corner of the dining room where she could watch without being seen, her entire body shaking with the adrenaline of her gamble. For a long time, he just sat there motionless. She watched as he wrestled with an unseen emotional storm. Then slowly, hesitantly, he picked up the dessert spoon. He dipped it into the crumble, breaking through the crisp oat topping into the warm, soft apples beneath, scooping up a little of the melting ice cream. He lifted the spoon to his lips and took a bite. And as he tasted it, Alex Blackwood, the billionaire tyrant, the monster of Table 12, closed his eyes. A single tear escaped from beneath his lashes and traced a silent path down his sculpted cheek. The single tear was the beginning of the thaw. Alex Blackwood didn't finish the dessert, but he didn't send it back either. He sat there for a long time, spoon in hand, lost in a memory Cassie could only guess at. When he finally looked up, the dining room was beginning to empty. He caught her eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. When Cassie approached the table, the intimidating fortress he usually wore was gone. In its place was a raw, aching vulnerability. His gray eyes, usually so cold, were clouded with a deep and profound sadness. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice raspy, stripped of its usual authority. "I do my research," Cassie answered softly. She decided against bringing his steak unless he asked. The ritual was broken. It felt wrong to try and resume it. "I'm an art student. I study people. I try to see what's beneath the surface." He looked down at the half-eaten dessert. No one has done anything like that for a very long time." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This restaurant, this table, this meal, it was hers." He said the word hers with a reverence that was almost painful to hear. He didn't need to say the name. Cassie knew. "It was Eleanor's favorite," he stated, not as a question, but as a confirmation that Cassie already knew his secret. "Yes," she said gently. "I know." He finally looked up at her, his gaze searching her face. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do this? Why risk your job for a man who has been nothing but cruel to you?" Cassie thought for a moment, searching for the honest answer. "Because I didn't think you were cruel," she said. "I think you're in pain, and I don't think cruelty and pain are the same thing. I saw a man who was making sure the world kept its distance so it couldn't hurt him anymore, then he's already been hurt." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. He motioned to the chair opposite him in the booth. "Sit, please." An employee sitting with a guest was a fireable offense of the highest order, but Cassie looked over at Mr. Dubois, who was watching from afar. The manager, seeing the unprecedented scene unfolding, simply gave a subtle, resigned nod. Cassie slid into the booth. "For 5 years," Alex began, his voice low and strained, "I have been coming here. Twice a week. I sit here and I order her food, and I find fault with everything. The wine, the service, the temperature of the room. Because if everything is flawed, if everything is wrong, then it makes sense that she's not here." He took a shaky breath, the confession spilling out of him as if a dam had broken. If everything were perfect, then her absence would be the only thing left that's wrong. And that is unbearable. The anger, the complaining, it's a distraction. It's noise. It fills the silence she left behind. It's something to feel, because feeling angry is better than feeling this. He gestured vaguely at his own chest, at the gaping void he lived with. "I was in the car," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I walked away without a scratch. The doctors called it a miracle. It wasn't a miracle. It was a curse. She was an architect. She built things, beautiful, lasting things. I just build code and profit margins. She was the one who made sense. Without her," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He told her about Eleanor, about how they met in college, about her infectious laugh, about her belief that he could change the world not just with technology, but with his heart. He spoke of the locket he wore, how she'd given it to him on their first anniversary with a tiny, ridiculous picture of them from a photo booth inside. Cassie listened. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She just listened, her expression full of the empathy she had felt from the beginning. She was an artist, and this was the most human, tragic, and beautiful portrait she had ever witnessed. "You're the first person to look at me and not see the billionaire, the tyrant, or the genius," he said, his eyes filled with a weary gratitude. "You just saw a man at a table. You paid attention." "I pay attention to details," Cassie replied. "It's part of the job. It's part of being an artist." His eyes lit up with a flicker of genuine interest, the first she had ever seen. "An artist? What kind of artist?" "A painter, mostly," she said, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "I'm trying to finish my degree at the School of Visual Arts." "Do you have any of your work with you?" he asked, his curiosity seeming to pull him, however briefly, out of the fog of his grief. Hesitantly, Cassie reached into her large tote bag that she kept in her staff locker and pulled out her worn sketchbook. She never went anywhere without it. She opened it and slid it across the table. He took it with a surprising reverence. He flipped through the pages slowly. It was filled with sketches of the city, portraits of strangers on the subway, studies of light falling on a stack of books in her tiny apartment. And in the last few pages, there were several charcoal sketches of him. Not of the imperious billionaire, but of a solitary figure at a corner table. His shoulders slumped, his face lost in shadow. She had captured the profound loneliness that she had seen from the very beginning. He stopped at one of the sketches of him. He stared at it for a long time. "This is how you see me," he murmured. "It's what I saw," she corrected him gently. He closed the book and pushed it back toward her. He looked at her, and for the first time, she felt like he was truly seeing her too. He saw Cassie Mae Thompson, the struggling art student, the observant waitress, the woman who had the courage to offer a monster a bowl of apple crumble. "You have a gift, Cassie," he said, her name sounding strange and soft in his mouth. "A remarkable one. You don't just see things, you understand them." The check came and went without comment. As he prepared to leave, he stood and looked down at her. The gap between the grieving man and the powerful billionaire was closing, replaced by someone new, someone uncertain. "Thank you," he said. The two words were imbued with 5 years of unspoken pain and a night of unexpected grace. "For the commentary and for the crumble." He walked out of the restaurant, but this time he didn't leave a chill in his wake. He left behind a palpable sense of change, a quiet hope that lingered in the air long after the oak doors swung shut. The change was not instantaneous, but it was undeniable. Alex Blackwood still came to the Gilded Quill every Tuesday and Friday, but the ritual was different now. The man was different. The first Friday after his confession, he walked in and, for the first time ever, he stopped at the host stand and greeted Mr. Dubois by name. The manager was so shocked he nearly dropped the reservations book. Alex sat at table 12, but when Cassie came to take his order, he looked at the menu, truly looked at it, for the first time in 5 years. "Cassie," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "what do you recommend tonight?" And so a new ritual began. She would tell him about the chef's specials, and he would listen. He began to order different things, exploring the menu with a cautious curiosity. Sometimes at the end of his meal, he would ask for the apple crumble. Other times he would simply ask her about her day, about her classes, about the piece she was working on. The staff watched this transformation with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The tyrant was gone. The hushed fear that used to descend upon the restaurant twice a week was replaced by a quiet respect. He started leaving tips that were not just generous, but life-changing for the staff who shared them. He learned the names of the busboys. He complimented Chef Antoine on a perfectly cooked piece of fish, an act that nearly gave the chef a heart attack. He was still a reserved and intensely private man, but the armor of deliberate cruelty was gone, stripped away by an act of understanding. About a month after their breakthrough, he arrived for his Friday reservation, carrying a sleek, flat briefcase. He ate his meal, and they talked about a recent exhibition at the Met. As she brought him the check, he didn't sign it right away. "Cassie, I have a proposal for you," he said, his tone shifting from conversational to the focused intensity of the CEO he was. "I have not been entirely truthful. I did more than just look at your sketchbook." He opened the briefcase and slid a folder across the table. "I showed your work to a few people, curators, gallery owners, people who owe me favors perhaps, but whose opinions are their own. The feedback was unanimous." Cassie's heart hammered in her chest. She opened the folder. Inside were printouts of emails, glowing assessments of her work, praising her unique perspective, her emotional depth, and her technical skill. At the back was a letter on heavy cream-colored cardstock. It was from one of the most prestigious contemporary art galleries in Soho. It was an offer for a solo exhibition. She looked up at him, speechless, tears blurring her vision. "This isn't a gift, Cassie," he said firmly, anticipating her protest. "This is an opportunity you have earned. I simply opened a door that your talent should have already kicked down. The gallery requires a full collection of new work, of course, which would be impossible to complete while working 60 hours a week here and attending classes." He pushed another document toward her. It was a contract. The Eleanor Blackwood Foundation, he explained, has an arts grant. It's been dormant for 5 years. I'm relaunching it. The first recipient will be you. It will cover your tuition and your living expenses for the next 2 years, allowing you to paint full-time and prepare for your show. There are no strings attached. It's not a loan, it's an investment in talent that my wife would have been proud to support. Cassie stared at the papers, at the name of the woman whose memory had brought them together, at the offer that would change her life forever. It was more than she had ever dared to dream of. I can't accept this, she stammered, overwhelmed. It's too much. Nonsense, Alex said, his voice softening. You taught me something invaluable, Cassie, something I had forgotten. You taught me that it is possible to look at a broken thing and see not the damage, but the potential. You looked at me and saw something other than a monster. Allow me and Eleanor's foundation to do the same for you. Let us see the world through your eyes. Tears were now streaming freely down her face. She looked at the man across from her, a man she had once feared, and saw not a billionaire or a benefactor, but a friend. She saw a fellow survivor who was slowly, tentatively, finding his way back into the light. She slid the contract back across the table and picked up a pen. With a steady hand, she signed her name. Her last shift at the Gilded Quill was 2 weeks later. The entire staff, from Mr. Dubois to the dishwashers, came to wish her well. Gavin gave her a fierce hug. You did it, kid. You tamed the beast. He was never a beast, Gavin, she said quietly. He was just a man who forgot how to be seen. On her way out, she saw Alex waiting for her by the door. Not as a customer, but as a friend. He wasn't there to eat. He was there to walk her home. As they stepped out into the crisp night air, leaving the warm glow of the restaurant behind, Cassie felt a profound sense of peace. Her life was no longer about survival. It was about creation. She had stood her ground not with aggression, but with empathy. And in doing so, she hadn't just saved herself. She had helped save someone else too. Two lonely souls brought together by a shared meal they never ate were stepping into a new beginning, ready to build something beautiful from the pieces that remained. This story reminds us that the people who seem the most monstrous are often the ones in the most pain. Alex Blackwood built a fortress of rudeness to protect a heart shattered by grief, and for years everyone reacted to the walls, not the person inside. It took one person, Cassie, with nothing but courage and empathy, to look closer and see the truth. She didn't just stand her ground, she stood for understanding. Her simple act of kindness didn't just change her life, it gave a broken man a reason to start healing. In our own lives, how often do we mistake pain for malice? How often do we avoid the difficult people instead of wondering what makes them that way? Cassie's story is a powerful testament to the fact that your compassion is your strength. If this story touched your heart and made you think, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories that explore the depths of the human heart. What did you think of Cassie's bold move? Let us know in the comments below.